I think first and foremost is that there's got to be a vision of what you want. And you have to be able to clearly articulate that vision to anybody who's going to be involved and engaged in that, so that when you do explain it, because the very next step is to make sure that senior leadership is with you at the table. But in order for them to be with you, you have to be able to articulate quite well what you think the outcomes are going to be and what success you're looking for. So we did that first of all, and then engaged our senior leadership. And that senior leadership group really is kind of expansive because it included the heads of the technical college system, which is where we're located in Georgia, and our commissioner, as well as the college presidents. But in addition to that, we had to make sure that the vice presidents for academic affairs, who we would have to dually enroll these students with, were on board and bought into accelerating pathways, as well as the student services and financial aid team. So that was critical in terms of the process. The next key players that we really needed to make sure we engaged were the key stakeholders that had to play with us when we tried to implement the initiative. So the Department of Labor, the WIBs, our workforce people, the community volunteer services that we have that would have to provide those wraparound services, transportation, child care, financial aid, other assistance, were also the things that we had to do. The fourth thing, and one that turns out to be critically important as we move along the way, is to take a look at Georgia as well as the technical college system's policies and procedures. Are the policies and procedures that we currently have prohibitive? Are they in place so that they could actually help us to move and advance the students forward? So taking a look at the policy levers and making decisions about what we needed to change or what we needed to enhance was probably the other piece of the pie in terms of just starting out and beginning what we were getting ready to do.
Something that we decided early on was we had to have a shared vocabulary. Adult career pathways means something different to anybody whom you ask. So what we did was we defined very early on what that definition is. As a matter of fact, we benefited from the national definition and also the definition that has come out of the Adult Career Pathway Initiative. We also were very, very fortunate to be part of two national career pathway projects that were built around the Designing Career Pathways model of the 6 essential elements. So we benefited from what was going on in other parts of the country that we really didn't have to start from square one, and that really helped speed up what we were talking about in adult career pathways and also how to get started when we were serious about it. We've identified 6, and fortunately they're in alignment with the 6 elements of the national model. The first one is cross-agency partnerships, where we started early on with having discussions across institutions of who does what are different roles of people in the positions that they held at the state and the local program level. We also decided early on that we had to identify certain sectors that we were going to prioritize for career pathway development. In Ohio, those started and still continue in manufacturing and healthcare. The third element that we realized was important were policy levers, and we began to put language together, first of all in our grant systems in Workforce Investment Act Title II as well as Perkins, where there were shared responsibility of what programs were going to do as they worked together around career pathway initiatives. We also identified that we certainly need money. We weren't asking for more money, but what we identified was if we pool the resources financially that we have in WIA Title II, and if we used adult Perkins money and Workforce Investment Act Title I monies, as well as employment investments, we would have a much larger pool of finances to actually pay for the system that we envisioned. We also realized that we had to have shared accountability. So early on we identified these are the outcomes and the expectations that our adult career pathways are going to have in Ohio, and we have stuck to those and we've reinforced those for 4.5 years now, and we believe that they're beginning to sink in with program administrators and personnel.
One of the things that I believe is a real strength in Kentucky is the development of our partnerships on the front end of our implementation, and forming an executive team that consisted of myself along with the Chancellor of the Kentucky Community and Technical College System as well as the Commissioner of our Department for Workforce Investment. And as a result of that, we meet regularly as an executive team to give oversight and of the implementation of our initiative, and to sort of regularly check on the progress of our initiative across the state with our respective agencies. Part of it is understanding and involving our local provider networks, our respective agencies at the local level. And we created local executive teams that were similar to our state executive team that represented the leads from our respective partner agencies, and empowered them to work locally. Another key factor in I think our success is related to the identification of sector strategies and looking at what the local labor market demands were in our state, and trying to associate the pathways chosen for implementation to local labor market needs, and to look at what would be family sustaining wage jobs, and to help our students work towards progressing in those particular areas so that they'll have meaningful outcomes and results as a part of it.
We talked a lot about bridge programs, and that was pretty much our basic start to taking a look at the instructional processes within adult education. As a part of that process, we determined very quickly that we needed a strategic plan for adult education, and that this initiative, Career Pathways, needed to be embedded as a part of adult basic education. So as we moved through the process, we developed that strategic plan, and it is a 5-year strategic plan that is really geared towards helping individuals move through a career pathway system, incorporating bridge programs as well as incorporating that career awareness component into instruction, but also really taking a very deliberate approach to looking at assessment and instruction, not just the traditional assessments that happen in adult education, but we are also looking at other assessment and assessing technology skills, assessing workplace skills, as well as just looking at those assessments that, like the Compass test and the AccuPlacer or the ASSET, those entry-level assessments that actually move individuals into post-secondary education. So then as a part of that, we had to really take a really strategic approach at looking at curriculum and instruction. As a part of curriculum and instruction, it's very important that we have the professional development there, that we are aligning with the Common Core and college readiness standards, that we're also looking at those evidence-based reading approaches that will help our students to make those transitions onto not only to post-secondary, but in between those levels. So we were trying to really build that pipeline and trying to really make sure that we had a handle on what was going on at each level, including the adult basic, secondary, as well as English as a second language. We also took a look at data and accountability and making sure that those pieces were there. So as you're developing the career pathway, you're also making sure that you're embedding the data components as well into the process, and making sure that as you're developing your data collection system, that you're also tracking that information relative to a career pathway system. So therefore, that means your connection to employment, your connection to post-secondary education data, finding out what's happening with those adult basic education students once they go through that program, but also as they move into the workforce and other educational opportunities. Another thing is basically looking at the overall program design. What does your program look like? And encouraging partnerships that actually take place both internally within the community college system or within community-based organizations or school programs, making sure that those partnerships are well developed, especially within the community college system, making sure that they're connecting with not only developmental education, but career and technical education, and also community education programs. So pretty much that's the gist of our bridge programs and the reason why we developed that strategic plan, because we felt it was really important to make sure that adult education was connected to all of the different services that are that are out there.
But one of the things that you have to do with a brand new program is to constantly inform the field and answer their questions about the program. And we do have a lot of turnover with staff, so we have monthly webinars. We also have conference calls, and we conduct numerous training sessions throughout our system. And this is something that you have to do on an ongoing basis to provide a career pathways program. You also have to form a lot of partnerships. We form very good partnerships with our curriculum component and with student services, because one of the barriers for students usually going through a career pathway program is they don't have the funds for transportation, they don't have the funds for books, and also supplies. So it's a great deal of training, and it's continuous over the years.
When we look back at the beginning of iBest, what we did was bring together 10 colleges in a pilot situation, and we allowed them to try very different models. And finally, after a year, we brought them together and teased out, so what are the pieces of those pilots that were being the most successful for students? And out of that, the iBest model was identified. And an important piece of that model was team teaching, having both a basic skills instructor and a career technical instructor in the same classroom. And of course, with that came the question of money. So having two instructors on the onset appears to be more expensive. So the first thing to do was to figure out, what do we need to do in order to sustain the model? Having used data in the very beginning to show that students weren't moving into college, students weren't doing very well, and our programs weren't being successful, we then again went back to that data we had collected in those pilots that showed students were highly successful in transition, progression, and completion of certificates in the iBest model. So we took that data forward to the presidents and requested a differentiated funding model. And out of that, the presidents were really successful because the results were so strong. Out of that, the 1.75 enhanced funding model was developed. And what that did is it provided the 0.0 to fund the content instructor for 100% of the time. The 0.5 paid for overlap instruction of the basic skills instructor for 50%. And then the 0.25 covered additional wraparound services and support to students, because we knew that the most important thing was to sustain the team teaching, because both students and faculty identified that as the most important aspect to student success, and data supported that. Once that funding model was established, we then took that to the state legislature, of course, along with the data that showed the results. The state legislature, again, having never seen those kind of results for basic skills students, allotted $5 million that were earmarked to pay for the enhanced FTE. And that money has since been put into the budget permanently and has been a big, important piece of moving forward in the sustainability. Then in 2007, we went back to the legislature and said that the biggest obstacle was finding a way to provide students without a high school diploma or GED with tuition in order to get started along the career pathway. So the legislature created what was known as the Opportunity Grant, and it still continues. And what that does is it funds students for 45 credits for their tuition, their books, and fees. And so really that use of data, first to show how poorly we're doing, and then to show the success of the model, have been essential in getting those other pieces in place for sustainability.